new public histories of Yorkshire, and I think this is a really wonderful opportunity not only to hear from some practitioners who are doing very exciting things in the sector, but also to draw together some of the themes of the day as well. So I'm very much looking forward to discussion. Just a quick note, unfortunately, Sophie Bora, who was originally meant to chair this panel, is not available to join us today. And also, you may have noticed that we have lost some of our panel members as well, unfortunately. So Olivia Wyatt and Chris Walker were unable to join us today, which is a real shame, but I think we'll still have, well, we'll definitely have a really exciting discussion. Just a quick note about the way that we're going to run this panel. We want it to be relaxed, and we want people in the audience to have time to ask questions. So in a minute I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'll ask them to say a little bit about who they are, what they've worked on. We'll have probably around 30 minutes of discussion amongst the panel, but then we will open it out to the floor for questions. So please do think of things to ask our practitioners. So we're very, very lucky to have three practitioners joining us today. First, we've got Ross Horsley, who is Volunteering and Access Officer at the Thackeray Museum in Leeds, but has also worked on the West Yorkshire Queer Stories project. We also have Fiona Grimshaw, who is Executive Director of the Brown Tree Society. And finally, we have one of our own former students, Charlie Kaiser, who's worked with Uncomfortable Cities to develop an Uncomfortable York tour. And I think Charlie has a plug for the Uncomfortable York tour as well when we come over to it. So we're really, really grateful to our three practitioners for agreeing to speak today. I'm sure it will be a really, really exciting discussion, and I think we're even more grateful given that it's the end of quite a long day, but I think absolutely will be worth it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hand over to each of our participants and just ask them to say a little bit about who they are, what they're working on, and how they see their role in thinking about new public histories of Yorkshire, and then we'll go from there and have a conversation. Okay? So I'm going to start with Ross on the phone, just because you're to my right.
Thank you, Lizzie, and hello to everybody. My name's Ross. I'm here today representing a project called West Yorkshire Queer Stories, which ran from 2018 to 2020 and was based in Leeds, Wakefield and Bradford. It was, to my mind, a fairly generously funded project. It received funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and interestingly, it was based at a sexual health charity, so I think that helped. It helps us get into communities a little bit more. We weren't coming from an academic or a big organisational background. So I think that's an interesting angle to the project that I was working on. I wasn't involved in writing the bid, but I joined the project as it sort of kicked off, basically. So we had received what seemed like a remit to collect a certain number of oral histories, a certain number of objects, and also some written-based stuff. The idea being that these oral histories would go into local archives and museums, same with the objects, and they would help to represent underrepresented voices of LGBTQ+ members of the local area within those organisations and archives, but also feed into artistic responses and provide materials for creatives and artists to use in the future. It was very much a volunteer-driven project. There were three of us working on it in a paid capacity, and we were tasked with recruiting volunteers to carry out most of the oral histories. The idea being that they will be able to talk to people on a level that would enable a richer discussion and a more understanding kind of conversation. So that's the project in a nutshell. As I say, it finished in 2020, so it's been really interesting for me today to come here and listen to the brilliant talks we've been having that have raised questions around legacies of projects. We're at the stage now that the project's finished, and I'm working in a different job now, but I'm able to sort of look at how it's carrying on, how are people using what we collected, are people living its legacy and carrying on bringing that to life. I'm also now working at a museum, so that's interesting in that some of our objects went to the museum that I now work at, so I've sort of followed them there, and I've been able to kind of advocate for them to be used in current and ongoing exhibitions, and draw some of the communities that we work with into the work that the museum now does. So it's a little while since I've talked about this project to an audience, so if there's anything that I've not explained brilliantly or you want to know more about, please do feel free to ask me about, and I'll pass on to the other people in the panel, so thank you.
Thank you, Ross. So hi, I'm Fiona. Hello everybody. It's been great. It's great to be here today. It's great to have heard some of the amazing presentations we have. So I'm from the Roundtree Society. I'm sure those of you who know something about the history of York will know something about Roundtrees, or you'll be aware of some of the Roundtree's products like Black Magic, Smarties, Kit Kat, that sort of thing. So the Roundtree family are a Yorkshire family by origin, and apart from being confectioners, they were very advanced in their time in terms of poverty, looking at the causes of poverty and also social welfare. So we're sort of talking from the end of the 19th century through the early part of the 20th century, when the company was at its height. It's now, well, the Roundtree brands are now owned by Nestle, so the Roundtree presence in the city is no longer here. So what we do as a society, our main goal is to keep the legacy alive, and that's the family, the Roundtree Company, and the 3 Roundtree charitable trusts that Joseph Roundtree created. And the reason why we want to keep the legacy alive is because of its contemporary relevance. So a lot of the questions that were big issues 100, 150 years ago about poverty, about housing, education, continuing education, I think you'll all agree they're all still very relevant today. So they're very much a Yorkshire family. It very much starts as a Yorkshire legacy. There are many members of the family who were MPs, councillors. One created Oxfam. They worked in humanitarian situations with refugees. But the legacy is not only in Yorkshire, it's sort of national and global, really, because they became a global country. So we do a lot of research, so we work with a lot of academic institutions, like we work quite closely with IPUP actually, but we are looking to expand our audiences because there's lots of research that we have been involved in. Particularly recently we've been researching women factory workers, which has been something that's been really eye-opening and a really exciting project to do. And we're really looking to expand our digital offer at the moment, because that's something that we feel, that we can expand our reach and our, tell people what we have, what content we have, what we can offer. In terms of quick words about me and my background, I've worked in Yorkshire for probably 10 years now, and I've worked, like Ross, at various museums, National Railway Museum, National Science and Museum in Bradford, Bronte Parsonage Museum, and also for English Heritage. And I think that's probably enough about me, so I shall pass the mic to Charlie.
Oh, hello everyone. I don't want it too close to my face. My name is Charlie, and I can't really call myself a recent graduate of MA Public History now that a new cohort's come through. But yeah, I graduated with MA Public History last year, and I focused around chocolate history in my dissertation. It wasn't because my name is Charlie, but that's quite fitting. I didn't really clock it until halfway through the project that, that's a good connection to make. But yeah, I took that dissertation, and really through a chance encounter at the Birkbeck Public History Conference with the Uncomfortable Cities directors, I set up a walking tour of York, a discursive walking tour. Now, Uncomfortable Cities started down in Oxford and expanded to Cambridge. But they run a discursive walking tour. What does that mean? It means that it's question-led. It's not sort of a person talking at you for an hour and a half. Really, the point is from the very outset to include the participants in the conversations and in the discussions of what we're having. We're bringing their experiences and their thoughts and their views and their contributions and putting them at the centre of the tour. And it captured me the way they were talking about it, and I thought York can do with something like this, because it's not often thought of a place with contested history. People often come here and they sort of spend some time at Minster, they go up Clifford's Tower, which has its own contested history within that as well. But it's very much seen as a kind of sanitised form, a space in which to forget the troubles of the rest of your life. And I thought, well, and the directors agreed with me, York is a perfect place to sort of make that the next spot on the map. So yeah, I thought it would be something they would consider and then say, oh, we don't have the funding for it. But no, they helped me write a proposal for IPUP's Community and Place Fund, That was wonderful. We also took on some 2 interns. I'm going to embarrass them now, Esme and Sophia, who I can't see. Anyway, 2 people who helped organise this conference. So they came on as interns, and we did some script development and some, well, really we launched the festival in May and June through the York Festival of Ideas, which is a sort of, I guess, a public outreach aspect of the university. We did a process of community consultation with student unions and with academics from both universities in York, community groups as well, affected communities, such as that with the Jewish massacre at Clifford's Tower as well, talking to people who had already engaged in these histories. We didn't want to tread on toes, we wanted them to be a part of this sort of participatory research endeavour. And yeah, that's what I've been doing for the past year, as well as a number of research projects or script writing development things, and running various events for chocolate businesses in and around York. So yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to mention. But yeah, looking forward to hearing all the questions. How's that?
Thank you so much. I think it's really, really interesting to hear about the different organisations and contexts in which you've worked, and I guess Charlie just touched on this a little bit in discussion, but I mean, I guess we've called this panel New Public Histories of Yorkshire, and I just wondered, can we talk about old public histories of Yorkshire? Do you feel that, you know, for example, York is a very kind of cosy space, or is there something that you are working with or working against when it comes to thinking about public history in Yorkshire?
Shall I go first? Thank you. I actually think that's a really key question. One of the reasons that I was keen to be part of the West Yorkshire Queer Stories project was because the histories that we were collecting, we were aware that people who lived through certain key aspects of LGBTQ plus history in Britain, they're an ageing population, they're not going to be around forever, and if they're not around to tell their stories, those stories are going to be lost. So, although it's a modern history, we wanted to try and take that back as far as we could within living memory, really, and that is the thing about oral history, it's talking to people, so it's going to be their memories. Some of our stories went back to the 1940s, some of them looked at how people became aware of their own gender identity, their own sexuality, and how that was received by other people in eras like the 1950s, for example. We couldn't really go much further back than that in our project. We inherited this kind of remit to collect queer objects. So, I mean, I don't know, what is a queer object? I still don't entirely know the answer to that after thinking about it for 2 years and all the time since. To give you an example of the sorts of stuff we collected, it might be something that seems as strikingly direct as some jumpers that were knitted by a lesbian feminist in the 1980s and wore them to kind of activist rallies. Or another one that we collected that I would find quite hard to describe if I didn't know the story behind it was a cake decoration from somebody's 21st birthday when they reached the age of consent in the 1970s. So that object needs that oral history, it needs that information to go along with it. Arguably, there are queer objects that may go back hugely far in history, and that is hotly debated. I was saying to Lizzie earlier, when you read criticisms of queering projects, they often seem to act like queer identities didn't exist before Oscar Wilde or something. And some of the histories that we look at when we look at what you might call queer objects are quite speculative, or they're designed to call into question assumptions that we make about people's identities now and in the past. So although, yeah, we were restricted in a sense with talking to people about their living memories in this project, I think it's something that just as humans we all kind of were aware of our own history and how that ties into those who've come before us. So it's something that was on our mind as part of the project, but yeah, I would definitely say we were what you would call a modern history project.
Thank you. I think probably from a Roundtree perspective, there's sort of old public history and then there's current public history. I mean, what drew me to the Roundtree Society, which is what I mentioned earlier, was the contemporary relevance of a lot of the work that they did. And a lot of them were public figures. I mean, they were MPs. Joseph was a very public figure. His son Seabohm, who did all the writing about poverty. And I mean, it was an amazing piece of work. If you have the chance to look at it, it's very detailed. It goes to exactly how much money people needed to live on, your average family needed to live on. It was all researched in York to, you know, be above the poverty line, basically. And although that is all historic now, some of those issues are still very relevant today. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is one of the charitable trusts, for instance, is one of the leading UK social research institutes, and they very much are still researching poverty. Some of the, I suppose, projects that we've been working on recently, they're probably perhaps new public histories, because the information is available or has been available, but perhaps has only been researched more recently. And what you have to remember that with the Rowntree history is that the archives are pretty much mainly held in the Borthwick Institute here at the university. But those archives have not always been there, and some of them have arrived quite recently. So at that point, that's the point at which the information becomes available for research if you know, there are people that are interested in it, or it's something that we want to pursue. So for instance, the female factory workers that I mentioned earlier, I mean, there have been sort of oral histories, and we ran an oral history project ourselves about 10 years ago, which is called York Remembers Rowntree. But then it's another situation where a lot of people who perhaps remember working for the company when it was still Rowntrees are sort of getting quite elderly now. So it's important to be able to keep those memories. And, you know, certainly the female factory workers, we found out a lot of things that we didn't know previously. And another area that we've sort of been looking into over the past probably 3 years is we sort of commissioned some research on global supply chains, which obviously, if you think through sort of the history of sugar and cocoa and its origins, takes you into perhaps a more difficult part of the Rowntree history in terms of, although we know that we don't believe that they ever participated in slavery directly, or we have no evidence to suggest that they actually had contracts of indenture. The research is ongoing, so that is, and you know, this is a very relevant sort of public history story to now. And I think that's probably what appealed to me about the role, was that, you know, a lot of the history is 100 to 150 years old, but there's such a lot that's still there, still to be found out. And the research continues, basically.
Yeah. Well, when we think about the idea of sort of new public histories, well, the temporal aspect is interesting there, because a lot of the topics that we talk about on the walk are things that are regularly talked about and have been in York's sort of heritage space, but we'll be bringing maybe new angles to them, or just identifying the facts that were already there. As part of the research development for the script, I work closely with the Rowntree Society and York Civic Trust. For example, we do have a stop talking about the Rowntree shop at pavement, and sort of using that as a kind of a focus to talk about how the empire maybe influenced the production of goods in a way which steps beyond the way in which people think about sort of ground country houses and how they might be decolonised. Well, what about industrial supply chains at the time? What's the other thing I wanted to mention? I've forgotten the other things I want to mention, so I'm going to pass the microphone.
We can come back to them. Yeah. But I think that's really interesting, kind of Ross talking about the creation of new collections and archives to document histories and lives that haven't been preserved in perhaps more traditional formats, whereas Fiona and Charlie kind of talking more about new ways of looking at existing collections or stories and spaces and thinking about them in the present day. So I think that's really interesting. I mean, I guess one of the things that we wanted to think about a little bit in putting together this panel is how in your work you have thought about how to make history more inclusive, particularly public history, and bring perhaps underrepresented voices and communities to the fore in your project. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit to that.
I guess I'm holding the mic. I need to go first. I mean, I think in terms of trying to be more inclusive, it's probably still a work in progress. Because traditionally, the Rowntree Society has been in being for nearly 20 years, and a lot of the work we've done has been with academic institutions like, for instance, both of the universities in York, obviously with archives, and we've only recently, because we have, like a lot of organisations since COVID, have realised that we have to be digital. And previously a lot of our work was sort of giving talks and lectures and organising in-person events, and we're now moving, well, we're still doing some of those things, but we're moving away from it. And I think that's how we probably see that we're going to be able to reach other audiences. For instance, some of the, we've been involved in a couple of events this year where we've talked about the women research, and because those events have been run either has hybrid events or mainly basically online events, we have definitely managed to start expanding our sort of offer and involving people who perhaps have lived experience of some of the, you know, so they may have worked at the factory, or they may know somebody who did, their mother, their grandmother. And I actually, interestingly, did a talk to the Joseph Rowntree Foundation on Monday. Gosh, it was only Monday, but it seems a lot longer ago now. And it was really interesting because that was people who work for the foundation who come from across the UK. And actually, there's about 3 or 4 people in the audience that were able to cite some direct Rowntree connections working at the factory. And I think we need to harness more some of those memories, some of those contributions that we can get. And I know we will be working with the foundation going forward on some of their projects. So I think we're looking to try and bring some of that into what we're doing to, you know, enable people to participate more in what we're doing, rather than us saying this is what we're doing and this is our research, to be able to encourage people to have a way of talking to us about it and being part of that.
No, already said what I wanted to say on that point. I just made a note of.
I can definitely say a couple of quick things on that topic. Firstly, it was really important to us that the stuff we collected didn't go into what you might call a queer archive that people could write off or not look at or not read or not listen to. So although we did archive everything on our own website, a huge kind of ethos behind the project was to put these things in the kinds of archives that people go to anyway when they're thinking about history. So that objects would sit in these museums and galleries. The oral histories, transcribed as fully as possible, would be available through the West Yorkshire Archive Service, so that anybody searching on any subject might, you know, come across one of these stories, didn't realise they were looking for it, or, you know, research it from an angle that we hadn't even considered, or might have considered irrelevant to our aims. So that was really important to us. And the second part of it, you talked about kind of underrepresented communities and people. It's, and I know that you all know this, it's easy to think of kind of the queer community as one community, but obviously there are a multitude really of communities within that community, some of whom, you know, really don't get on with each other and things like that. So we had to think a lot about, you know, how are we going to get deeper into the different kinds of identities and genders of people that needed to be represented at this particular moment in time. And one of the ways we did that was through trying to recruit as widely as possible our volunteers and meet up with as many different groups and things like that as possible. So that was really important to us. Yeah.
I think that's a really important point though, because community and ideas about working with communities has been a really important theme of today, kind of thinking about experiences, but also thinking about how we do that in an ethical and sustainable way has been something that has come through in a lot of the papers in different ways. And I wondered, I mean, can you speak to that? Is there anything that you'd like to say about thinking about how you have worked with communities, how you approach working with communities, whether they be local or other kinds of communities? You're wielding this as a mic.
I mentioned it already, but yeah, along the process of community consultation, we tried to get as many people's opinions involved with the script, but also we didn't just take them on, sort of send them the script and tick off a box. We brought them onto the tour. So we had specific sort of stakeholder tours in the weeks leading up to the tour, and that didn't just influence the historical content of the tour, it also was influencing the way in which we were presenting it, because of course down in Oxford it's a similar but again slightly different sort of target audience. So bringing in that kind of community focus really helped us unpack our own positionality, I guess, to use a very public history phrase, about, especially as a person from the South coming to York and then talking about York histories, having people with much more lived experience of York, and especially people from volunteer organisations such as the Association of Voluntary Guides, who run their own walking tours of York. Bringing their expertise was really essential, and they let us explore a lot of underrepresented histories as well, such as Irish migration to York or poverty in York, or even connections to the city walls, things which me and my research biases into chocolate, of course, might not have seen. So I think that was a really essential part of our tour process.
I think from our point of view, this is very much work in progress in terms of how to involve communities and make sure you're involving the right people. But I think probably the most obvious comment I could make about researching global supply chains, for instance, is this is not something that you can do without involving people of colour, people who, you know, whose families or ancestors were directly affected by that. So that is one of the challenges that you need to address and overcome when you're, you know, dealing with something that is a difficult history. And it's been really interesting to hear some of the presentations today in terms of how those sorts of things have been tackled. So for us it's still a work in progress, but something that we're very aware that we need to be conscious of and we need to be thinking about with all of the research that we do.
Yeah, definitely. And something that this question makes me think about a lot is community as a community of place. And with our project, West Yorkshire Great Stories, having the place literally named in the name of the project is something we have to think about a lot. Can you tell a West Yorkshire story if you weren't born in West Yorkshire? Can you tell a West Yorkshire story if you're a refugee who's been